Welcome to the Rex Andrews Show. If you're a first-time listener, welcome to the party. We're going to have some fun. And if you are a return listener, thank you very much. And the reason why I thank you is we have recently cracked the top 10 fastest growing podcasts. And that's pretty exciting. We have listeners on 6 continents. And if I could figure out how to market to penguins, we might have 7. But we're excited because of you, the listener. We're growing fast, and it also is a huge, basically, compliment to our guests. We have great guests that are on the show. Got a great one for you today. It's going to be a lot of fun. Quick house cleaning. Don't forget to subscribe. You always want to subscribe, comment, rate us, give us that 5-star, and then also to look for us on anywhere you get podcasts. So if you don't like the platform you're on, there's 22 other choices. You can find us on social media, and you can always go to the website and see all of the things we're up to, the bios of our guests, previous and upcoming. We have a huge list of folks, interesting people. All right, so that's it. Don't forget to stop by the website for the podcast. It's rexandrewshow.com. Okay, this one's going to be a lot of fun. Strap in. We got a great guest for us today. Very interesting. Our booking folks do a great job of finding these people, and this one's exciting. He has headlined shows on 5 continents, okay? So basically, wherever we've got listeners, except for one, he's done it, so that's exciting. He's an entertainer, and he's a comedian. First comedian I've had on the show, besides my feeble efforts. So I'd like to welcome to the show today, Shaun Eli. Shaun, how are you?
I'm good. I'm surviving the pandemic.
Oh, man, is it crazy or what? All right. So what I'd like to do is just so, a lot of our listeners are doing other things and following along. If they're following along at another device, can you give us your website real quick so they can connect with you and follow along in the conversation?
Yes, my website is brainchampagne.com. And if you try to go there and it doesn't work and you misspelled champagne, it's because you're not drinking enough of it.
That's great. All right. So, Shaun, there aren't a whole lot of people majoring in comedian, okay? It's not something you go to college to, right? I mean, maybe for some of us, we got kicked out of a lot of classes because we were trying to be a comedian. But that's not something that people most start off and say, well, maybe there's a few. I'm going to be a comedian, walking around with their bicycle, their trike, or their big wheel and saying, you know what, Dad, I'm going to be a comedian someday. So I think this is going to be an interesting journey. So what we'd like to do on the show is tell the backstories and see where were you born? Where'd you grow up? Did you have siblings? What did your parents do for a living? What happened when your parents found out you wanted to be a comedian? Education, things you did as a youth, like sports or shoplifting or, whatever, that kind of stuff. So take it away. We always talk about this on the show. It's my philosophy that I have more interests than just one lifetime, and around the corner is another discovery. So let's discover Shaun. So take us back to the beginning.
Well, I should have been taking notes because he asked a lot of questions.
Well, I'll remind you.
All right.
If you forget anything, I'm going to poke you, okay?
All right. Well, first of all, I might be the rare person who's never shoplifted.
Well, okay. So you didn't do that as a youth. Fantastic.
Right. Now, you say you don't major in comedy. Except for Emerson College, you really can't major in stand-up comedy, at least in the U.S., as far as I know. But I think junior high school or middle school is where people major in comedy, because that's where the class clowns show up.
Oh, yeah.
But those people don't become comedians because they get that beat out of them and learn that they better shut up because they get in trouble. It's the quiet, shy guy, usually a guy, in the back of the room who thinks all these funny things and is afraid to say it. He's the one who becomes a comedian.
Oh, I know that. I can tell you when I was in 6th through about 8th grade, I probably spent as much time in the hall for my smart mouth as I did in the classroom, because I was always pushing the limits and stuff. But look at me, I'm not a comedian. All right, so where were you born and where'd you grow up?
Born in New York City, lived there for 7 years. Teachers went on strike. My parents packed up the family and moved to the suburbs.
Okay.
And a quick story about that. when I was in Queens, New York, which is right next to Long Island, and I was 7, and my mother said, we're moving to the suburbs. And the only suburb I'd ever heard of was Long Island because I lived right next door to it.
Sure.
And so when she said, we're moving to the suburbs, I said, are we moving to Long Island? And she said, no, we're moving to Westchester, which I never heard of.
Right.
And I said, why are we moving to Long Island? And she said, you'll understand. Why aren't we moving to Long Island? And she said, you'll understand when you're older.
Okay.
And I'm older, and I do understand why she want the family to live there. But she denies telling me that.
Well, back in the day and parts of my career, I spent a lot of time in New York. And unfortunately, right there on the tip of New York, Long Island there, Citibank had their big offices there in that big town.
Long Island City.
Yeah, Long Island City. So I spent way more time there than I ever want to admit. So interesting. Then you get into the rest of Long Island. Okay, so did you have siblings, or do you still have siblings that lived?
Yep. 2 older brothers, as far as I know, as of yesterday, both still alive.
Okay.
And if they didn't, somebody would have told me.
Sure.
But my sister-in-law just posted on Facebook yesterday that they acquired a very expensive bottle of scotch. So I'm going to want to hear more about that from them. But I have 2 older brothers. I'm the youngest because I think most comedians are the youngest because we're the ones who needed the attention.
Okay. Now, what was growing up with your brothers? Was it WrestleMania? Did you guys get along? What was your upbringing with your brothers?
They're 6 and 7 years older than I am. So if there was WrestleMania, it wasn't fighting WrestleMania, it was playing.
Okay.
But we all got along. We all still get along. And I'm from an academically successful family. One brother has a PhD and 2 master's degrees. And the other brother is a doctor with an MBA married to a psychologist with a law degree.
Holy cow.
I'm the one with the bachelor's degree.
Okay.
But I'm the one that can make my parents laugh. So I think that qualifies for something.
That's not bad. Now, you said that there was a teacher strike. Were your parents both in education then?
No, they moved because they wanted the kids to go to school.
Okay.
They had 3 kids sitting at home not learning anything.
Oh, kind of like 2020, huh?
Yeah. Well, and this might also be an issue 2020, but one of my oldest brother was a junior in high school, and my mother was afraid that if the teacher strike went on too long, it'd be hard to get recommendations to apply to college.
Ah, I see.
Nothing, unfortunately, funny about that, but it's
no kidding. Okay, fantastic. So what were you interested in as a youth? Did you play sports, theater, were you a video game guy? What was your youth extra time?
I'm old enough there weren't video games.
Yeah.
There was Pong, I think, when I was in junior high school or high school. That was pretty much it at the time.
I can remember in junior high, I think 8th or 9th grade, and there was a Pizza Hut and they had a Pong table. And then we went to it way advanced to a Pac-Man. I mean, we really advanced there. So my kids just laugh.
When I was in college, I played Space Invaders. And one night I went to sleep and I closed my eyes and I could see the invaders going across my visual field. And I said, okay, I think it's time to stop playing video games. And that was the last time I did.
Last time. Okay.
But as a kid, I liked playing baseball. I wasn't great at it, but I loved playing baseball. No theater at all. I was in the 5th grade play. Everybody was in the 5th grade play in the class. Sure. I was in the 5th grade play. I don't remember what the play was, but I had 3 lines and then I got shot for whatever the play was. And after that, for about 2-3 weeks, people would come up to me and they'd say, oh, I thought you were dead. Ha, ha, ha. And I'm like, I am never getting on stage again.
Oh, wow. Well,
so no drama background whatsoever until I started stand-up.
Okay. So you got out of high school. Where'd you go to college?
University of Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow. Fun. Penn. That's great.
Yep.
Fantastic. And now I have to ask the next question. What did you major in? What did you get your bachelor's in?
Marketing and economics. Okay. And I wanted to be a brand manager. My friend's older brother was a brand manager, and I thought it looked like a cool job. But he was a branch manager for a deodorant company, a brand manager for a deodorant company. And I didn't want to be a brand manager for a deodorant company. It didn't sound exciting. But every time he saw me, he would throw deodorant at me, which he thought was funny. And I thought, hey, free deodorant.
Oh, that's funny. I mean,
so I ended up, like everybody else from Penn, I ended up working in finance.
Okay. Yeah. When you said brand manager for deodorant, I'm like, what?
Yeah, but they got a market.
Oh, yeah. They got a market. Everybody's got a market. I mean, I'm sure that there's a brand manager for everything, even really cheap shampoo. Yeah. So, All right. So you started working in finance then?
Yep.
Okay. How long did that last?
20 years, I guess.
Wow. Holy cow. Was it large corporations, small companies, mid-size? Where did you play finance?
No, on the money side of it for financial institutions.
So for banks. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. My son-in-law is finishing up his master's in finance and going to be working for the accounting companies. So great. Yeah. All right. So 20 years into it, you're working on the bank side of it. What made the pivot point to change all that?
Well, I'd say about 13 years into it, because nobody goes from not stand-up comedian to boom, you're a pro stand-up comic overnight. It takes a long time.
Long time.
So just like anything, you don't get good at something immediately. The only difference is if you're a baseball player or a violinist or whatever, you usually start when you're a kid. And by the time, to use the example of violin, you're a squeaky 6-year-old playing the violin, but everybody's encouraged you because you're 6. By the time you're 15, if you kept at it, you're probably pretty good.
Right.
Stand up, you don't start until you're an adult. So you're going to suck at it for a long time. So nobody goes from not a comedian to a comedian for a while. So I was working in finance and I went on a date with somebody and she said, you should try stand-up comedy. And I said, I have no interest whatsoever in getting on stage. And she said she had just taken a comedy class because she wanted to try stand-up and I should come see her class perform. And they were better than I thought they would be. So I said, maybe I'll take the class. And then I started performing.
Wow. So where did you have your first performance looking back in your career?
First performance was at Caroline's Comedy Club in New York City. They do a show. Well, it's a class show. So it's technically open to the public, but it's basically friends and family of the people in the class.
Okay.
And it's at like 5:30 on a Friday or Saturday.
Okay.
And it was weird because I told the teacher I've been writing jokes for a long time. I was a good joke writer. I wasn't a good performer. I told the teacher, I want to go early in the lineup because I'm nervous and I want to get it over with. Just don't put me first. So he put me first.
Now, did you still have, I don't know if it's stage fright, but that reluctance to get back on stage? Did you go back to elementary school and go, wait a minute, what am I doing?
It's the weirdest thing because I had stage fright. I mean, I didn't have terrible stage fright. There are comedians I know that said they would throw up before every show for like the first year or two.
Wow.
I didn't have that, but I wasn't worried about the quality of my material because I knew the material was good. I wasn't worried about my performance because I knew my performance would suck. I would just do the best I could. My only real fear was forgetting my jokes. And once I reached the point where I had enough material that I knew I could finish whatever time I was allocated on stage, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. Right. I wasn't worried about that anymore. I mean, I still get nervous occasionally for a big show, but not quaking in my boots. Although when I was new, there were times I would literally wish the show got canceled so I wouldn't have to go on.
Now, when you first started out, were the time slots based on where you were as experience, or was it based on the club? I mean, how did that work when you got 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 5 minutes? How does that
almost work? Always start out with 5 minutes.
Okay.
Whether the way it works is when you start out, there's a few different ways to get on stage. Nobody's going to pay you when you're new because you're not good. Right. Nobody's even just going to give you stage time when you're new because you're not good, and comedy's a business.
Sure.
So you can go to an open mic night, which at least in New York and LA, the only people in the audience are other comedians waiting for their 5 minutes on stage. So you don't have people who are particularly encouraging or paying attention. They're just sitting there thinking about their own set.
Sure.
Or you can get stage time in a show with an audience. If you hand out flyers on the street, you get compensated in stage time. Or there are clubs do what's known as bringer shows, where if you bring 5 or 10 or 20 people to the show, they'll give you a few minutes. And depending on the club and how many people you bring, affects your time. But usually, it's 5-7 minutes when you're new. And that seems like a long time when you start out.
Okay. So how long does the 5-minute period of your career run? I mean, is it based on sort of the number of shows you do or
reputation? It's how good you are. It's how good you are or how friendly you are with whoever's running the show.
Okay.
If your best friend's running the show, maybe they'll give you 15 minutes.
Right.
Or if you're running the show, you give yourself as much time as you want. But it's based on generally on skill level. And how long does it last? I mean, I've been doing this 18 years and I still occasionally do a 5-minute spot here and there. That's what they give me. But a typical comedy club show outside of New York and LA is an hour and a half. And the MC does 15, and then the middle act does a half hour, and the closer does 45. And that's reasonably standard.
Okay. That's cool. How long did it take you to get comfortable? You know, you said you were a good joke writer. Okay. That was your base skill. How long did it get you to be comfortable in presentation?
More than 5 years.
More than 5 years.
I was talking to a comedian when I was like 3 years in, and he used the phrase new comic. And I said, what do you consider a new comic? And he said 5 years and under. And I'm like, I don't think I'm a new comic. And I've been doing this for 3 years. And then at 5 years, I'm like, I don't think I'm a new comic. I've been doing this for 5 years. And then at like 7 years, I look back and said, yeah, I was pretty green at 5. So I think I say to people, you have to get better to realize how good you're not. Because wherever you are, you're going to look back at a couple of years ago and say, I thought I knew it all then, but I was wrong, but now I do. And a couple of years later, you're going to look back at now and say the same thing.
Okay. Now, comedy has evolved a lot. I mean, I remember back, I'm 55, so I remember back to the days of like the Don Rickles that was just like one-liner after one-liner type thing.
Yeah.
A lot of people now are really threaded, at least that's the way I would describe it, of sort of a theme to what they're doing. When you started, was it threaded and themed like that, or was it sort of the one-liners and hop around?
There's still one-liner comics, not very many.
Yeah.
I'm amazed at one-liner comics because 45 minutes of one-liners.
Oh my goodness.
Is a lot to remember. I mean, if I tell a story that's 7 minutes long, I don't have to remember. I know the story because it's something that happened to me.
Sure.
But I only need 7 7-minute stories on average to fill, more than 45 minutes. Now, some are 3 minutes and some are 10, but there's not that much to remember. But a one-liner comic, it's a lot. So when I started, I was thinking about being a political comedian. I realized you're always having to rewrite your material.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to be very general or people don't know what you're talking about. You can't get into specifics. And also, you're going to piss off half the audience. So I said, I'm never doing that. That's silly.
Especially in this day and age. Oh, my goodness, you might get shot. I know the way the people are so divided.
Well, it's funny, though, because I did a couple of world tours before the pandemic.
Oh, you did?
And overseas, people, as soon as they hear I'm an American, their curiosity was, where do I stand on American politics? When Trump was president,
yeah,
it was very divisive.
Sure.
And so I realized I had to open with a Trump joke just to get that out of the way. And then they would listen to what I had to say. But otherwise, they were wondering, like, is he pro-Trump? Is he anti-Trump?
Yeah, that's funny. I look back at the comics like Andrew Dice Clay or Rodney Dangerfield and stuff, and they would do those. Now, they might have a series of one-liners, but they literally were one-liner guys and stuff. And it looked exhausting. And now that I'm doing my podcast and stuff, like, that's a lot to remember. I would think that's hard. And I don't even know if I can pull up in my mind anybody that really is a one-liner anymore.
Stephen Wright.
Okay, that's true.
I don't know every comic. It's a lot to remember, and it also doesn't distinguish you. Yeah. Because the advice I got when I started was, make your routine about you. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is, nobody can take your material if it's about yourself.
True.
And the other is, what they told people was, if it's about you, you can get a sitcom. Because when I started, Jerry Seinfeld had a sitcom about himself. Ray Romano had a sitcom about himself. Roseanne Barr had a sitcom about herself.
Yeah, Tim Allen.
Sitcoms. Yeah, everybody was getting a sitcom. And that's where the money is. It's almost impossible to become a famous stand-up comedian unless you've been on a sitcom or something similar to that. I could count on one hand the number of comedians who got famous without the benefit of TV like that.
Well, and Jerry Seinfeld has made more money than he can print based on all the syndication, and rerun money on that. Gosh, the guy's made a fortune. So I had never thought about that. But yeah, now that you mention it, all the big names did have shows.
Yeah. And they weren't famous when they got the shows. They were, they may have had their spots on the Tonight Show or something, but they weren't household names until they got the shows.
Oh, that's funny. So are you a comedian that does a lot of physical oriented stuff as far as, you would have, oh my goodness, what was his name? John Candy did a little bit, but the other guy, I always think of him in a van down by the river. Oh my goodness. Well, did you do much physical, or what was the basis
of Sam Kinison?
No, not Sam Kinison. Sam Kinison was that. Oh, it was the guy. He was on Saturday Night Live. He was always opposite of Spader.
A very large guy who died? Is that
the heavy guy that died.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on his
name. I'm drawing a blank too. But anyway, he was very physical oriented in his comedy because he was very, very expressive and always falling over things and stuff like that.
Yeah, and of course, everybody watching or listening to this has, is going to say, how did you not know it's Boom?
Yeah, well, I didn't either. And I loved his stuff. I did a church function one time and I emulated him. So I'm having a hard time drawing it out of my head. So don't feel bad. Okay.
And I can picture him, but he was a sketch actor, not stand-up.
So not in so much.
But no, I probably stand still too much because I watch somebody like Chris Rock, who is just a powerful preacher on stage. And he just walks back and forth. And Chris Rock obviously does giant theaters. So the stage is not like this big. It's, 30 or 40 feet long. And he just goes back and forth. And then turns and fires his punchlines at the audience. I would like to do that. But I'm getting more emotive. I'm basically just to stand still and talking to the microphone.
Talking to a mic, okay. Well, Dave Chappelle's a lot like that too. A lot like Chris Rock. He's combing the stage kind of thing. So when you were in your early days, and they may be still the same people, who were some of your favorite comedians that you just really thought hit it out of the park?
It's funny. When I started in stand-up, I would watch Bill Cosby. Mm-hmm. And Bill Cosby is a storyteller. He talked about his family. And I, at the time, wanted to be like that. The comedian side, not the rapist side, obviously.
Sure.
And I would say, I wish I had stories like that, but my life is boring. And I don't have them. And then as I did more stand-up, I realized what things in my life could become stories.
Sure.
And now I'm a storytelling comedian, still not a rapist.
Yeah.
So Bill Cosby, Robert Klein, Rita Rudner, there's a lot of funny people.
Yeah. One of my favorites is Bill Burr. I just laugh at him so much. He's pretty raw. He's pretty out there, and and he's not afraid to say things that offend a lot of people.
So. I mean, it's funny because I'm pretty much a clean comedian. I try to avoid things that will offend people. But in the last few years, people get offended or triggered by a topic. So even if you're making fun of something, the fact that you brought up the subject makes them uncomfortable and they get upset. I'm like, I'm not perpetuating that stereotype. I'm making fun of the stereotype. Like, you shouldn't mention those stereotypes. Like, they exist. I didn't create them. I'm proving they're stupid. They're like, well, I don't want to hear about it.
Oh, it's crazy. I don't even know how you do it today without offending someone in part of a show, because so many people are just offended by so many things now. I mean, like you say, just mentioning them just triggers people off. And that was been one of the things when I've developed my podcast is I always try to keep it on the cleaner side. I try to stay away from politics. I try to stay down the middle on things because I don't want to piss anybody off,
It's impossible. I mean, you can't even operate a restaurant without people saying, I can't eat this, I can't eat that.
Yeah.
I mean, my thought would be, why did you come into an Italian restaurant if you can't have gluten? But they're like, but don't you have gluten-free pasta? Now they have to, but But just as an example, when I started out, I had a joke about having what was then called a mentally retarded friend. Sure. And the joke did not make fun of the mentally retarded. It made fun of everybody because the gist of the story was, we're worried about, global warming and fair voting and economic policy and losing our jobs and a long list of worries that everybody has. And she's just happy if she can wake up and have eggs for breakfast. Yeah. So the joke is she's a happy person and we're miserable and maybe we should learn to be happy like her, was the summary of the story. Not a funny summary.
Right.
And I did that once at a comedy club. I maybe told it twice. And a friend of mine came up to me who was in the audience and she said, you know, I have a brother with Down syndrome. And I said, no, I didn't know that. She said,
Mm.
in every audience, it's very common. Down
Yeah.
syndrome is a pretty common illness or disease or whatever the right word.
Condition. Sure.
Condition. Yeah. And she said, if you have 100 people in the audience, somebody's going to have a relative with Down syndrome. And I stopped telling the joke. And now I realize somebody's going to have a relative with everything.
With everything. Yeah.
I mean, the joke wasn't that strong, and I don't tell it anymore. But everything you talk about is going to piss off somebody. You just hope you do your best.
Well, and two, you know, what's funny, I have some friends through church that have a daughter that's Down syndrome. She's 30 years old, and she's just happy. She's one of the happiest persons I've ever met. But yet, if you were to say anything about Down syndrome, someone's out there that's going to get pissed. Oh, my goodness.
Well, I have friends with I think he's 19 now. They have an autistic son, and he's barely communicative, but he's happy. I mean, he was a little kid. They would give him a little soap bubble thing where you blow bubbles, and he would just watch the bubbles float. And later they got something that automated it. He would just hold the trigger down and shoot out thousands of bubbles. And he was thrilled. He'd do that, and he laughed. He's a happy kid.
Now, question runs through my mind now. Are you doing comedy full time, or are you still doing other things on the side?
No, I 7 years in, I gave up the day job. So this is all I've done. Now it's tougher because there's almost no place to perform. Yeah. I've been doing Zoom shows. I'm in New York. I did outdoor shows over the summer. Okay. And that obviously curtailed for the winter. And New York comedy clubs are opening, I believe, on April 3rd. Wow. So I won't be fully vaccinated by then, but I hope to get back on stage in mid-April. And be able to do shows. And assuming people show up, it'll be thrilling.
So was doing the Zoom-based shows, was that just a weird dynamic?
It's a very weird dynamic. And part of it is, I say the secret to comedy is 100 people in a room that holds 70. Yeah. If you go to a comedy club, you realize the ceilings are low, the room is packed, everybody's close together. Mm-hmm. And that's not just done for economic conditions, but also you really need laughter to echo. If you put those 100 people in a 1,000-seat theater, not only wouldn't they hear as much laughter, they literally would not laugh as much because they don't hear the other people laughing. So when you do an outdoor show, you lose the laughter. When you do a Zoom show, there's a delay. Yeah. There's at least a second between the time you say something and the time people hear it, which means I hit a punchline at, let's say, 10 seconds. They don't hear it till 11. I don't hear maybe it takes a second for somebody to laugh. So that's 12. I don't hear the laughter until 13. The other people don't hear the laughter until 13, which means if they start laughing because the first laugh happened, we're not going to hear their laugh till 14 or 15. That's 5 seconds of almost no laughter. So most comedians just trudge through thinking, oh, I'm not getting laughs, so I'm going to keep going. And it's really hard. And it's very hard to tell a joke, not hear laughter, and just wait for the laughter.
Oh, my goodness. I can remember, not that I've never been on stage for that, but I can remember one time going into the office of a guy that ended up being one of my mentors in tech. And he was a very thoughtful, very patient listener. And I'm up there, I'm just a young kid, I'm 24, and I'm just drawing all over the whiteboard and just, cracking jokes and stuff like that. And it was like everybody in the room, the other executives, it was like they were on a 7-second time delay. And you'd stop and there'd just be this awkward pause because you would expect reaction and stuff. And that's really awkward. So I can't even imagine when it's your business to be telling jokes and then just waiting for the reaction to happen. That must be weird.
It's hard to do. I'm fortunate that, well, first of all, I learned the lesson, but it took a while. And I think there's comedians who haven't, because I've been on shows where they just don't get a laugh in a second, then just keep going. Mm-hmm. It's hard to do, but I have a joke, and I'll tell you the joke. I don't know how well it'll do here, especially with one audience member, and we'll practice the delay.
Sure.
We'll experience that. But I have a routine where I'm talking about pickup lines. Okay. And it's not a particularly original, brilliant joke, but I say there is one pickup line that's 100% effective. It's 100% effective because the one that women use on men. It goes like this. Hi. And the punchline is silence. Yeah. Because you don't realize nothing follows until there's silence. So I'm used to, and that's a really hard joke to tell because if nobody laughs, somebody's got to laugh. Somebody's got to be the seed of laughter to realize, oh, that is the punchline. The fact that hi is the only thing they have to say. And when one person laughs, everybody else figures it out. So I'm used to waiting 2 or 3 seconds for the laughter to start on that joke. And I literally, when I tell that joke, have to say in my head, 1001, 1002. And if I get to 100, 1003 and there's no laughter, then I'm like, okay, I got to keep going. But so I'm used to waiting.
You're used to waiting. So when you were forced into doing the Zoom, which, you know, a lot of people have, gosh, we used to interview people in person when I was doing radio and stuff. Was it difficult to write sets for that? Did you do sets longer, shorter? Was there any impact from that perspective as the amount of time and jokes you're going to tell?
People say Zoom shows should be shorter because people have a short attention span. And so instead of an hour and a half, they're usually like an hour or 45 minutes. Okay. And part of it is everybody's at their computer. They're not in a club. If you watch a comedian at a club and you don't like something he's talking about, you don't think it's funny, you're not going to walk out. You're going to wait till he talks about the next subject.
Sure.
Or the next comedian. If you're at home and you can just click your mouse and open your email, you're distracted, you're gone. You're not coming back.
Sure.
So I try to tell shorter stories. I try to do more one-liner stuff, especially if I'm opening the show. Just to do one-liner stuff to get people to go laugh, 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 laugh.
Right.
So it is, I mean, I have a 13-minute story, and I'm not telling that on Zoom.
Sure. Sure. So what other trends are you seeing? I know I've seen this, been a lot of ads or placements for it out there on like Facebook and stuff. Some of these apps that are coming up, like the Dry Bar app that's up there, the folks out of Utah that have a club but are making it so the people are telling their story and then they can get paid kind of on a tip on the app. What do you see that's happening right now for technology? Do you think we're going to see more Zoom? Do you think it'll automatically go back into the club? More apps? What do you think is going to happen?
People are dying for live entertainment. People want to go back to clubs.
Yeah.
And I can tell that because the outdoor shows, the audience have been like they're an indoor show. So you do an outdoor show and people are sitting spread out outdoors or they're in their cars and they have a great time and they laugh their heads off, which would not have happened. Wouldn't have gotten the same response if I did this 2 years ago. But that said, there are people who can't go to a comedy club. You live in a small town where there's no comedy club, or you live in a place, if you live in Indianapolis, let's say, you're going to see a good comedian come through to the comedy club in Indianapolis every once in a while, but you're only going to see Jim Gaffigan once a year if he goes to Indianapolis. Okay. He's from Indiana, so that was stupid for me to use him as an example. But there's a lot of smaller cities where you're not going to see the comedians you want to see. But rather than wait for their special to come out on Netflix or HBO or wherever, if they have that, I think what you're going to have in the clubs is, and they're starting to try to figure this out, is a hybrid live Zoom show where there's people who can pay, let's say, $5 and they can watch a live show on their TV, on their computer or TV. But the thing that's going to be different, they haven't really done this yet as far as I know, but I think this is what's going to happen, is the comedian on stage is going to have a computer monitor in front of him where he's going to have all the people on Zoom. And behind him is going to be a monitor where the audience can see the people on Zoom. Oh, so wow. The audience on Zoom can be participating in the show. So if the comedian does with them crowd work, talking to the audience, hey, what's your name? What do you do for a living?
Yeah.
You know, whatever kind of conversation he wants to have, he can also do that with the Zoom people. So they feel like they're at the show if they choose. So I think that's going to happen. But the technology isn't there yet because of the delay and the other problems.
Well, I think it's interesting. You brought up a point that I hadn't really thought through. I mean, I love comedy. I'll watch. If I really don't watch any live television, so I usually watch, specials. Heck, I'll watch some of the specials on Netflix 3 or 4 times just because I like to laugh. Even when I know the joke's coming, I still like to laugh. But you made a really interesting point about people who live out in the middle of nowhere who might enjoy comedy. So if I'm in Valentine, Nebraska, with a population of 2,200 people, and the closest town is Omaha, and that might, that's a 7-hour drive. I don't have a lot of choices for comedy.
Right. There used to be a guy named Tribble who used to put together what he called Tribble runs, and it predates me in comedy. But he'd get a couple of comedians and he'd arrange bar gigs in these little towns. And the comics might have a 7 or 10 hour drive between cities. But the towns were thrilled to get this because it was the only live professional entertainment they had.
Yeah.
So comics got that experience, and the audience did too. But yeah, unless you're going to go to Omaha and spend the weekend the same way people might go to New York and watch a bunch of Broadway shows and spend a week touring, unless you're going to do that and have the means to do that, you're never going to see a pro stand-up comedian.
Exactly. So I want to dial back a little bit. What was it like when you were juggling your finance career in banking and then you were out on the road doing shows? Were you doing stuff close by? Were you traveling? I mean, that must have been a brutal schedule.
I was doing very little traveling.
Okay.
I was mostly doing stuff in the New York area.
Okay.
And I had a boss. I was surprised. My boss was my age, and I thought she was, pretty reasonable person to work for. But she hated the idea that I was doing stand-up comedy. And she'd be like, well, it's, detracting from your career. And I'm like, you have a family. Your family takes a lot more time than me on stage.
Oh, that's funny.
And I said, why don't you come to a show? I want you to come to a show. And she would say, oh, I would lose all respect for you. And I'm like, do you think I'm putting pencils up my nose? What do you think I'm doing on stage?
Oh, that's
I'm telling
funny.
jokes. I'm talking. There's nothing bad about what I'm doing. It's not porn.
Yeah. So what did your family think when you quit your day job? I mean, your parents, your brothers. I mean, tell me a little bit of what ribbing did you get when that happened?
Well, with one brother a doctor and the other one an investment banker, it took a little convincing. So what I did is my parents kind of liked it as what they thought was a hobby. They didn't see it as a career path. And I'm Jewish, and there's a lot of Jewish comedians.
Sure.
But in my parents' eyes, they lived through the Depression, and they thought financial security is the most important thing. And to me, I went to college, and I didn't live through the Depression. I took financial security kind of for granted. I have skills. I'll always have a job, and unless the world comes to an end. But I was judicious in saving in case the world came to an end because my parents had lived through that. And my mother actually said to me when I told her I wanted to be a comedian, without thinking, she's like, that's not a job for a Jew. Yeah, you want to tell that to every comedian who's Jewish? But, you're supposed to be,
talk to Jerry Seinfeld.
Yeah, a banker. Yeah, a banker is acceptable. You should be a doctor or a lawyer or a scientist.
Right.
A banker is okay. But comedian, there's no money in that. So before I told them, I sat down and I wrote out a business plan because I'd already been doing stand-up for money, just not as much. But because I couldn't tour much with a career, with another job, I sat down and I said, here's how much I'm making in comedy. Here's how much I believe I can be making in comedy if I don't have the day job in the way. And here's, my house is paid for. Here are my living expenses. Here's how much I have in savings. My father was an accountant.
Yeah.
So I had a whole thing, and I'm like, I'm fine with this. I'll be okay. And my colleagues in banking would say, well, what's your plan B? What are you going to do if it doesn't work out? And I said, there's no plan B. And they said, what do you mean there's no plan B? I said, I deliberately want to burn every bridge I can.
That's right.
So that I don't have any option of if I have a bad week or a year to say, oh, I'm just going to go back into banking. I don't want to do that.
No.
I'm not working for anybody else anymore. Unless I get a job on a writing staff of a TV show. I'm not working for anybody else. I have my job. I work for myself. I'm done. I don't need my alarm clock unless I have to catch a flight. If I don't like, I'm successful enough. If I don't like somebody, I won't work with them.
Okay. Well, that's great because I always prescribe to this old statement, if you're going to take the island, burn the boats. So, you just got to pivot and go for it.
Well, then how are you going to take the next island?
That's right. I better figure out how to build a helicopter. Maybe I'm on Gilligan's Island and I'm the professor and I can make a radio out of a coconut. So
we're all good at it.
Yeah. They never got off that damn island, did they? So anyway, so you did a lot of travel. I mean, I talked about you opened up on 5 continents. Tell me a little bit about period of that. What happened there with that?
Well, I decided I wanted to see the world, and what better way to make it tax deductible than
nice.
And my dad was an accountant. This is the way my brain works.
Sure.
So I picked some countries I wanted to visit, and if they were English-speaking countries, or in the case of Thailand, had an English-speaking comedy scene,
sure,
I was going to go there. And I've headlined shows on 5 continents. I haven't done South America yet.
Okay.
I don't know what there is to do in South America, but I have to figure that. And Antarctica, I actually worked on a plan to get to Antarctica to do shows. And because there's an exchange program where the scientists have artists come in and spend some time there.
Sure.
And I looked into it, but it's painters and photographers. It's not entertainers. And the reason is they said, you know, you're only going to do a show once or twice for us. We're not sticking your 180 pounds plus all your clothing and belongings on rare, very valuable air, you know, cargo space to bring you here just to do a couple of shows. If you were a painter or a photographer and you were, you know, part of sort of a cultural exchange program, we'd have that. So Antarctica is almost impossible, but South America, I think, is achievable.
You know, I do a lot of location-based targeting for marketing, and I haven't even been able to figure out the how to even GPS the those scientist stations out there. So I guess I've given up on Antarctica. I would have to buy Penguin's phone, so I don't think that's going to work.
Find a scientist or put your shows on a thumb drive and find a way to get the thumb drive to somebody.
That's a good idea. I hadn't thought about that. So so loaded question here, because again, it's fascinating to learn about, you know, the backside of being a comedian. The front side's easy, get up on stage and tell your jokes. Where's the worst place you ever performed? I mean, there's got to be a couple.
Actually, it's not the worst place I've performed, but I performed in a barn.
A barn? A
barn. Okay. I say I performed in a barn, I performed in an embassy, and everywhere in between.
And in between. Okay.
But I don't know if there's a location. I mean, I did a show once. Everything being equal, a bigger audience is better and easier than a smaller audience.
Sure.
But I did a show on a weeknight between Christmas and New Year's during a blizzard, and 3 people showed up.
Wow.
And I mean, the room only held about 50, so it wasn't like it was a stadium. But they were a great 3-person audience. They trudged to the club to be entertained, and they were ready to be entertained. And instead of doing comedy material, we basically sat on the side of the stage and talked to them and made it funny, and they were thrilled. It was a lot of fun.
Nice.
But the worst gig I ever had, I think, was somebody hired me to perform at a singles event. And I said, nobody wants to listen to a comedian at a singles event. They're there to meet people.
Sure.
I'm the opposite of meeting people because they're being told to sit down and shut up.
Sure.
And the guys are going to be resentful because they want to be the center of attention. And now they're not. And she said, oh, no, it'll be fine. You'll do a half hour, and then there'll be plenty of time for them to mingle. And at the time, you know, I needed the work and thought I'd give it a try. And, you know, there were some people laughing, but I had to really work hard because comedy is not background music. You have to pay attention.
Right.
And if you're distracted for 10 seconds because you're looking at somebody and thinking, you know, I want to go talk to them after this guy shuts up. And then they wander away, and then you're like, oh, where'd he go? Where'd she go? What was he or she wearing so I can find them again? They're attractive. They look interesting. You lose them.
Yeah.
And so it was very hard. And at the end, I realized now what I should have done is, you know, try to talk to the people and get to know them and get a conversation going and maybe try to introduce, oh, you're a dentist. Does anybody here want to date a dentist? Who here has the worst teeth? You know, whatever you can do to get the conversation going. But I didn't know that at the time. I didn't have the skills. And after the show, a guy came up to me and he looked at me and said, you need better material. And I said, you know what? I don't need better material. My material is fine. I've sold jokes to Jay Leno for his Tonight Show monologue. My material is fine. What you convinced me right here is I need a nicer audience because you're being a dick. Why would you go up to somebody and say something like that?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I probably would have popped off and said, no, I just need a better audience, you moron. So interesting. Okay, so another question that pops into my head is, what was it like the first time you had a serious heckler? I mean, the guy that's just relentless and wouldn't give up.
The worst for me was a woman.
Oh, really?
And, yeah. And it was interesting because comics, you slowly learn how to deal with hecklers.
Okay.
And this is a lesson I needed to learn, and I learned it at that show. But the first thing you do is ignore them and hope they go away.
Sure.
And if they keep at it, you've got to remember they're usually in the front, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if they're in the front, the rest of the audience probably hasn't heard what they said. So if you try to just put them down gently, but the rest of the audience hasn't heard them. So they're wondering, why are you bashing this guy in the front? So you have to look down at them, repeat what they said, and then respond to it. And that also gives you a little more time to think when you're repeating what they said.
Sure.
But the worst, and comics learn, hecklers fit into a few categories.
Okay.
And once you know why they're heckling, you can deal with it. So if you have somebody who's so drunk they think they're in a conversation with you and they're just responding to you, they mean no malice, they're just drunk and won't shut up. Then you can say, you know, what's your name? And what's your name is actually very disarming because then they're not anonymous anymore. But
Sure.
What's your name? I'm Pete. Hi, Pete. And you talk to them for a couple of seconds and you say, Pete, it's been lovely talking to you, but I have all these other people I have to talk to. And Pete will usually shut up.
Okay.
The worst, every comic I think will agree. Now, by the way, I've been elected to speak for every comic.
Okay.
Every comic I think would agree the worst is a bachelorette party. And the problem is, one, they're drunk. Two is that bachelorette party is all about the bride-to-be. She is the center of attention. She's got all her friends with her, and the whole evening is all about her. Until you walk into a comedy club, and now they got to shut up and listen to this guy on stage or woman. Now it's all about that other person, and they don't get to participate. And so they start interrupting. And I was at a club, and small club, and they didn't have anybody to police the room because what should have happened is a bouncer should have gone over and said, you know, it's time for you to shut up. And I tried to be polite. They were a third of the audience.
Oh my goodness.
So I was afraid if I got too mean, I would get in trouble. It was stupid of me because I was timid, and what I should have done is been more forceful and put them in their place. Because from my standpoint now, it's my show and it's their job to shut up, just laugh, but not
Sure.
interrupt.
Sure.
And I tried reasoning and I was timid and I learned my lesson. Like, no, I'm going to be mean if I have to. And now I have lines to shut them up. And I do the best I can. There's one comedy club that I think does something brilliant. They don't serve Pepsi, just as an aside. They don't serve Pepsi in this club. If they have a soda, it's Coke. Pepsi is the code word, meaning I need help.
Okay.
So if you're on stage and there's somebody who's being disruptive, you can just say, you know, I could really use a Pepsi up here. Or this guy looks like he wants a Pepsi. And that's a clue for somebody to go get the bouncer and say, this guy needs to be talked to.
Oh, wow. That's great.
But every club should adopt that, and they don't. I mean, not every club has a bouncer, but they should.
So the woman at the bachelor party was the worst one you had to deal with.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I did the best I could. She eventually shut up, and I thought, oh man, I had a terrible set. And so many people, and I was the middle act, I wasn't the headliner then. So many people came up to me afterwards and said, I really appreciate it. I loved the job you did. I thought your jokes were funny. You did a great job. Like, at least a third of the audience said that to me, but the club never booked me again. And it was actually kind of stupid because this is a club in a town where I have a lot of contacts, and half the audience was there to see me. And if I went back, and the owner knows this,
it would bring the people back.
I will. The two times I worked there, the place was filled, and one was like the last weekend in August when everybody's on vacation, and I still filled the club. So it's actually a bad business decision. Plus, I'm a much better comic. But he's like, yeah, you had a bad night. You're not coming back. Which is stupid. And I didn't think it was that bad a night from the audience's standpoint. And everybody has a bad day at work. But, you know, I probably will try again now that I'm a little bit more famous and a lot better and have more credits. I may try again to see if I can go back, because if they open up after the pandemic, they're going to
need some talent. So now, when you decided to go full time, were you working with an agent at that time as someone to book for you?
You know, everybody says, "Oh, why don't you get an agent?" Or, you know, you need a good agent. Agents don't get comics work in general.
Okay.
Their attitude is, "I'm here to field offers."
Okay.
So they may get you some work, but they're not doing it to make money, because comics make so little money. 10% of that is nothing.
Yeah.
So an agent doesn't make money from that. What they do is hope they get you enough bookings that you'll stay with them if you become famous.
Okay.
That's where
interesting.
But it's not a big revenue source for an agency to, you know, get 10% of a $2,000 or $3,000 weekend.
So if you're running, you know, a tour, let's pretend it's not COVID days, how much of your time is spent getting your bookings and putting together your schedule?
About 110% of it. I spend probably more time on the business side than I do on the writing.
Performance.
But there are comics who are successful enough that it's much less work for them.
Sure.
But for me, it's a lot of.
How much writing do you do for your presentations and your shows?
You know, it varies, because I know some comics who say, I sit down an hour a day to write, and sometimes it's random thoughts on a piece of paper. It goes nowhere. I don't do that. I write when I have something I think of that's funny. Okay. And I don't know how this happens, but I'm very fortunate. A lot of my stuff comes to me in my sleep. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and think of something funny. And hopefully I'm not so tired that I say I'll remember it in the morning and roll over and never remember it in the morning. But I keep a pen and a piece of paper next to my bed, and I write stuff down. And usually I'm like, oh yeah, that was what it was. But if I don't write it down, I don't remember it.
That's great.
And then I work on it. And I type it. Sometimes if I'm really excited, I'll type it into the computer and, wake up and turn the computer on and type it in. And the next morning, I'm like, oh, this is funny. That's funny. And I'll work on it here and there for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. Sometimes I find stuff on my computer that, I wrote 5 years ago. I'm like, oh, I think this is good now. I can make this funny now. But 5 years ago, I didn't have the talent to make that joke work.
So what's next on the horizon? What are you striving for next?
Getting the hell out of my house.
Agree with that. I'm just so over all this. I think most people are. It's just time to get back to being with people and being social and just the vibe of people and karma. I think we've had enough. I know that's a sentiment so many people share.
You can say you're over it, but until things are safe, it's not over us.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm kind of disgusted by everybody saying, oh, I don't need to wear a mask. I know it's getting political, but I don't need to wear a mask. Don't tell me what to do. I think we're a whole country of don't tell me what to do. Sure. That's basic American. That should be the American slogan. Don't tell me
what to do. Yeah. It's funny, way before, and this is not pat myself on the back, but I'm a type 2 diabetic. And one of the things that my doctor, and this is like 6 years ago when I first got diagnosed with it, my doctor said, do these things and it'll keep you healthy. Every year get a flu shot, okay? Because you're susceptible to getting the flu. The second thing is keep hand sanitizer in your vehicle. And whenever you go in and out of anywhere, use hand sanitizer, just, touching doors and that kind of stuff. And then the third one she said, which was, I'm not sure why she emphasized it, but I understand now. She said, whenever you go to the grocery store, wipe down the carts.
Oh, yeah, because studies have shown the two dirtiest things are gas station pump handles and grocery cart handles. Yeah. So I also carry hand sanitizer. Yeah. And I carry it, and I would bring a little tiny bottle into a restaurant because you can either get up and wash your hands after you order, or you can use hand sanitizer because the menus are filthy. Yeah. Menus are full of germs because people licking their fingers are touching menus. And then the wait staff that's wiped down the table with the same rag that they wipe that other table down with is also hand sanitizer. So I always carried hand sanitizer.
Well, and the anecdote of my funny little stupid story is in a 6-year period before the pandemic started, I never got sick. And before, every year I get a cold or, flu or something. I mean, people thought my family thought I was crazy. And I'm like, well, I haven't had any. I've been sick in a long time. And when everybody was, all putting up a storm about don't tell me what to do. Well, yeah, I wasn't happy about wearing masks everywhere, but then you sort of realize, okay, if that's what it takes, you do it. But I was like, look, I'm gonna do the hand sanitizing and washing because I've been doing it forever and I'm never sick.
I don't want to wear pants if I don't have to.
That's right.
Apparently I'm supposed to.
That's for sure. Well, it's been really interesting to get the backside of this because this is a side of comedy that I don't think very many people ever understand. Now, looking back over your career, you've been doing this for quite some time. If you were to sit down with a young comic that's just getting started out, what advice would you give them?
Well, the standard advice every comic gets is stage time, stage time, stage time. Every time you get on stage, you get a little better.
Sure.
And I would add to that a couple of things, and then I have other advice. But sure. I would say, pay attention. If you're at an open mic night, pay attention to the other comics. Just watch them. You don't have to think about it. Stop thinking about yourself and writing down your jokes. Watch them, because you, without even thinking about it, will learn from their mistakes. Mm-hmm. You will just unconsciously realize what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. And I've told comics this at open mics, the comics that don't pay attention, in 6 months, they're gone. You never see them again. Because the ones paying attention don't get better. The second thing, another piece of advice people get, so definitely get on stage, but record your sets, which a lot of comics do. Now it's easy. A video camera is $200. A phone is, everybody's got a phone.
Sure.
You can record your set. The hard part of that is not the pushing the record button, it's the pushing the play button. Because it's like hearing, nobody likes hearing their voice on a tape recorder.
Yep.
Multiply that by 100. Watching yourself is terrible, but you'll learn from watching yourself. You'll realize what you're doing wrong and you'll get better.
Yeah.
The other thing I tell people is work on your weaknesses, not your strengths. So I'm a decent writer and not as good at performing. I should spend less time writing and more time performing or rehearsing. Okay. Like I was on the rowing team at college, and part of the training for rowing is lifting weights, and part of the training is running. And the guys who were good runners spent more time running because they liked it. And the guys who were strong spent more time in the weight room because they liked it more than running. And they have that backwards. If you're weak, lift weights. If you got good aerobics, stop running and lift weights. If your aerobics are weak and you're strong, you should be running, not lifting more weights.
Exactly.
Work on your weaknesses. I say comedy is 1/3 writing, 1/3 performing, and 1/3 marketing. And you got to be good at two of them.
Wow, that's great.
So work on the one, and also, big piece of advice: don't be an asshole. Because comics, we all think we're funny when we start, and we're not. And we're going to get our breaks more from other comics than we are from anybody else. And if you act like a jerk, you're not getting those breaks.
I'm sure, because you've like that one club that you had the rotten performance in, and the owner won't have you back.
Yeah, and but I mean, right.
But if you were a jerk about that, you never ever going back, right?
Well, let me give you another example. If a comic is headlining there and says to that club books they have a booker for that club. I'm not going to mention their name, but for some reason they hired somebody to book that room. It's a once a week room, who really didn't have any comedy experience. And I swear that when she started, was getting comedians by going to open mic nights and writing down their names. So the comics they started with were terrible until the word got out, hey, there's comedy here, get in touch with the booker. And she got better at it. But they book their own all three acts. But if they didn't, and somebody said to them, I'm headlining the show, I want to bring Shaun as the middle act, that might get me booked there. But if I were a jerk, that headliner would say, I don't want to work with Shaun. He's a pain in the ass.
Yeah. All right. So we got to put you on the spot. You got a little ditty you want to share with us, a little quick set that, now, again, you're in a current audience of one. It'll be in the thousands once this is listened to. But do you have a little set that you'd like to share with us real quick?
You're basically asking for a one-liner because I'm not going to tell the story.
Okay. All right.
I can give you a couple. I can say, you hear people refer to a stereotypical Jewish, because I mentioned I'm Jewish. You hear people refer to a stereotypical Jewish mother. Nobody ever talks about a stereotypical Jewish father. So we're Jewish. I decided to look into this. I went and I asked my dad. I said, Dad, what is the stereotypical Jewish father? He said, I'm busy. Go ask your mother. All right. I also heard on the radio that the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, did a survey. They did a study, and they found that New Jersey's heroin is the strongest in the country. It's 71% pure. That's got to be a little embarrassing, don't you think? When your heroin is cleaner than your drinking water?
Yes, especially if you've been to New Jersey. That's great. Well, I've really enjoyed this. I've learned a ton, and that's what it's all about for us. So now I always ask this question of all of our guests, because it's just sort of a silly thing. We've learned a lot about you, a lot about comedy. The backside of this and stuff is, in our world today, we always have this silly thing called a bucket list. And in fact, I've met the bucket list guy. He's down in Australia. Go to bucketlistguy.com. Trav, great guy, funny. Anyway, everybody's got these bucket list things they'd like to do before their life is over, but there's always an opposite of everything in the universe. There always is an opposite. So it's a word that rhymes with bucket, starts with an F, and I won't say it for you, but what's something on your F-it list that, you know what, Shaun's just not going to do?
I'm never eating haggis again.
I'm with you on that one.
That was a mistake. Now I learned to ask what something is in it, what's in something before I eat it.
Oh,
things I would never do.
Yeah.
There's not much I'm afraid of at this point.
Okay.
I mean, there's things that just totally don't appeal to me.
Sure.
I'm not interested in having sex or marrying another man,
Oh.
which would be fine for other people. It's just not for me.
Sure.
And I say to that, I don't like mushrooms, but I don't care if you eat them.
That's right.
So same thing for that.
Okay.
So and clearly, sex with children is off limits.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not likely to kill somebody either.
Right.
Except in self-defense, but I don't think that's what you were asking. You were
asking
which crimes am I avoiding?
No, not which crimes you're avoiding. It was just mostly things you just, I have no interest in. Like for me, I want to go back to Mexico City. Been there. It was a horrible experience. I don't like having semi-automatic rifles pointed in my gut just at the hotel. I don't like sardines. Never going to do that again. Nope. Sorry. Been there, done that. So, just simple things like that.
Well, I mean, there's things I really have no interest in doing, but if somebody told me they wanted me to do it, I mean, I have no interest in skydiving. I have no fear of skydiving.
Right.
I have a pilot's license. I fly small planes. I'm not worried about jumping out of an airplane, but or going up in a small plane for that matter.
Sure.
But I have no interest in skydiving. But if I were dating somebody and she said, "Hey, let's go skydiving. I really want you to do this with me," I'd say, "Sure, fine."
Sure. Okay.
Same with scuba diving. That's actually was on my bucket list for a while, and I just sort of ran out of motivation for it.
Yeah. I don't really want to be fish food. There's too many things in the water that are bigger than me. And
no, you know what? You're either going to be fish food or worm food at some point.
That's true. That's true. Well, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing your experience, giving this insight of all this. It's been very educational. I've enjoyed it. You're a delightful guest to have on. And so when people can get a hold of you again, can you please give out your website?
I was hoping you were going there because when I said comedy is 1/3 marketing, I'm like, I haven't done a great marketing job here.
No, we always make sure our guests get plenty of exposure.
And the other thing is, I worry about not being funny enough in interviews because nobody expects a singer to sing in an interview, but everybody expects a comedian to be funny all the time.
Sure.
And I worry about not having made anybody laugh enough when I'm interviewed. But I will say my website, I'll tell you two things. One is my website is brainchampagne.com. And I got that specifically because when I started comedians URLs, not every comic had a website 18 years ago. Everybody does now. But what I wanted to make sure is people would remember it, and they wouldn't remember my name, even though I learned the lesson of mention my name in my set as much as I can.
Sure.
So people remember it. So when I tell a story about an ex-girlfriend, I said to Jennifer, and Jennifer said, Shaun Eli, blah, 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 so that I mentioned my name. But people wouldn't spell it right. So I wanted something memorable, and I picked brainchampagne.com. And the reason to go to my website is not just that there's a bunch of comedy videos on my website. It's all free, but you can sign up for my email list. And every month, and I don't share email addresses with anybody, but every month you will get original comedy and stories from the world of stand-up comedy. And it's all free. And you can unsubscribe, but I don't know why you would, because it's funny stuff. So, and also this is what I need to emphasize. There's a lot of jokes on my website. If you want to know how many, I never counted, but there's 50,000 words worth of jokes on my website. And to give you an idea of the amount of content 50,000 words is, novels are usually less than 100,000 words.
Sure. That's great.
So, brainchampagne.com. Don't forget.
Fantastic. We've been a delightful guest. Probably have you back on about 6-8 months from now just to check in and see how things are going, post the pandemic. I hope.
Oh, no, I'm burning my webcam as soon as this is over. not the show, as soon as the pandemic's over.
Yeah. As soon as we get back to normal, I'm excited about that. And I'm sorry, I'm not accepting these ideas of new normals. I'm going back to what we were before.
Oh yeah, I'm going to be licking strangers any week now.
Just don't lick any shopping carts or gas pump handles. So.
Nope.
Fantastic. All right, Shaun, thank you very much. It's been a delight to have you. Appreciate your generosity and your time, your insights. You're helping a lot of people see a side of comedy that we don't see because most of the time we just see the guys on stage. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I'll come back in 6 or 8 months.
Okay, fantastic. All right, folks, we're going to call it a wrap today for this episode. Don't forget to stop by Shaun's website, brainchampagne.com, and then also stop by the show website, which is rexandrewshow.com. his profile and links to his stuff is there, just like all of our guests. And as I say every time to everyone, there's always too many interests for just one lifetime. And until next time, be safe, be bold, and make it a great day.